As you just saw. I've got the turbo mounted up in its place, downpipes in its place just to make sure that it fits. I've got the engine short rim intake on here so that I can figure out what I need to do to, you know, connect the dots. The EGR delete is hooked up. On this particular example, all I need is the coolant system re-looped. So that's taken care of, along with the hose for the coolant system to hook up to, as the feed comes up over the top from this hose right here. And let's see, return, or I might have that backwards. So that's in. This is where the intercooler pipe is roughly going to go. Just making sure everything is fitting. The version 2 has this heat shield back here, which is kind of in the way, so we're going to have to trim that down or bend it. This right here will get twisted down so it's not in the way. This section of cowl doesn't go back in because the turbo sits so much higher. Because of the 2-inch raise from the adapter and then the overall size of the turbo itself. Not a big deal. Done that on a couple of jukes and it runs fine. So everything's kind of getting in place. Trying to come up with a game plan for the factory wastegate control. I'm going to try to mount it kind of down low like this and run the wastegate rod underneath over to there. But I'm just going to have to play around with that a little bit. Making a bracket for this is actually going to be easier than usual because it has 4 points for me to hook up to. So that's nice. So yeah, making some decent progress. I think the next thing I'm going to play with is just this intake here. Give me a little break from working with stainless steel. So let's do that next. So I always cringe a little bit when I cut up one of these brand new intakes. Kind of just hope you don't mess up. I'm going to show you guys a little trick that I figured out a little while ago that I could do. So I need to make a reducer to two weird sizes, and by weird sizes I mean 2 3/4, which is the in-gen intake, down to 2 1/4 So this right here is actually 2.5 inch pipe. So what I'm going to do is actually put this in, put a bead roll on the end of it so that it just slides into the 2 3/4 pipe. Now obviously they would have a lip sunk into the 2 3/4, which is not best for flow. So what I do is cut it off halfway around that bead roll, throw it in the bandsaw, and literally cut right across that bead roll. So it's a nice smooth reduction. Then I take my 2 1/4 pipe and do the same thing onto the 2.5 inch pipe. Then when you weld it together, you get a nice, fairly smooth step down without having to order a reducer. It's on the intake side. It's not going to affect any performance. It just is a way to make a nice, clean looking reducer. If I wanted to, I could just cut a slit, squeeze it down, and then reduce it that way. But I don't like how that comes out. And this also gives me a chance to actually put this into real world practice. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bead roll on this. Nothing too deep. Just enough to make up that 1/8 of an inch on either side that you have to, so that it fits pretty firmly in the 2 3/4. All right. So I have a piece of 2 3/4 right here. I'm going to check to see if that fits in there. And it does. It's very tight, doesn't really wiggle around. So that's that. So I'm going to put it in, cut right off there, and then cut right after that so that I have that little teeny tiny piece. I'll weld that onto my 2 3/4. Then I'll bead roll my 2 1/4 that I need into that. Alright, so we have the intake in, it's mounted up to here and there. It's pushed in a good amount of the way, but not enough so that this won't have any flex in it when the engine slightly moves around because these solid mounts. The filter's at a little bit of a weird angle, and I did that just because I didn't have any 2 3/4 inch pipe to extend this out. So if I have to, after I go to put the battery in, if this is too close to the battery or I don't like how it sits, I can always just cut a chunk out of this, like a pie cut, and just whip the filter around, no big deal. But the intake is done, so that's a nice big step. I didn't put the mass airflow sensor back in just because this is going to come in and out a few times, so I don't want to damage anything. So the next thing that I am going to work on is probably going to be the coolant lines, because that's something that needs to be done, and with doing the coolant lines I'm also going to have to move this around, so that is what's next. Yeah, I did some boring line stuff. So I was able to use the Blausch coolant line and just re-bend it to face the direction that I want. It's going to kind of sit like right there. I did the same thing with the other coolant line that it came with, so you can see that it's facing pretty much exactly where I want it to for the hose. Unfortunately, the Blausch tube size is a bit too big for the OEM coolant hose size, which is only 1/4 inch. So I just got to pick up some adapters for that and then just throw some hose on there to the adapters and be ready to go. Next thing I figured out was the oil feed line. So I had these banjo fittings for Subaru turbos laying around because I do so many of these swaps. So I got that with the line. The only issue I have is I have to order a banjo fitting to fit on the block. Now I don't like to do that when there's a factory turbo involved. I'm not even sure if you're gonna be able to see it. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be able to see it. There it is. I don't like to do that, but because of the way that I had to run this downpipe, or the way I chose to run this downpipe, I should say, I'm going to need a banjo fitting on there, which you can see where the steel braided line is being run. It's not that big of a deal because the heat shields aren't there, but on a factory turbo setup there is a heat shield there, which is why I do the 2 fittings in the oil feed line kits. So that's no big deal, just have to order that fitting. And then the other thing I got figured out was the oil drain line. So way down here, again, let's see if we can get this to work. Way down here, we have our hose. So what I did was actually take a V1 PVC hose and actually cut off 1 inch of it and ran it up to the drain line on the turbo, so I didn't even have to actually fabricate anything for that. The PCV hose is actually the same material as the factory drain line, so I have some tube shielding that I'll put around that so that the hose doesn't get melted and burnt by the exhaust. But that was actually a really simple solution, so that's awesome. So things are moving along. I think the next thing I'm going to do is I've marked out EGT, primary O2, and then the wideband O2 to run in here. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is actually pull the downpipe back out and put those bungs in there, which the EGT is going to be a bit of an adventure, and I'll show you why right now. So this right here is the EGT sensor that's located in the turbo housing, and we're going to be putting this back in. I'm fairly certain this is only used for the EGR system, but just in case, we're going to put this sensor back in. Now the issue we have, as you can see, there's this fixed collar, and then the actual threaded part is free floating. So what I would usually do is you could just take a nut and weld it to the downpipe and thread this in, but because of the way that this is, obviously I'm not going to be able to do that. So my battle plan is I found a nut that fits. It's around here somewhere. My battle plan is to get a nut that fits over that, get a washer that fits up against this, weld the nut to the washer, and then weld the washer to the downpipe. So what that'll allow me to do is spin this in, tighten it up. It actually isn't that tight. When I took this out of the turbo, it was actually pretty loose. I said to give it a little twist and it came right out. So that's good, so I don't have to use anything crazy thick. It's the same kind of EGT sensor that is found in the Cummins from what I've been able to find, but the bungs that they sell are like $15 for the stainless steel ones, when I can just make one that works and looks just the same here. I may as well just do that. A little extra labor, but it works for me. So that is what I'm going to work on next, is making up the flange for this thing. Alright, so I have my nut, which threads on there nicely, and then I also have my washer. These are both zinc coated, so I'm going to have to hold my breath while I do this. So I'm going to grind down a little bit of the nut because it's a little dirty, and then I'm just going to center the washer over the nut and just tack weld it, make sure it fits on there perfectly fine, and then just finish weld it, and that'll be that. Alright, see if this works. So EGR, sensor, and my modified washer nut thing. Yeah, I'd call that a success. It's pretty in there. Of course it's just hand tight, but yeah, that'll do. That's what I need right there. Cool. Alright, so the downpipe needs to be pulled out, and then I'll go ahead and start welding bungs onto it. Okay, I'm back from burning my butt. Had a piece of slag fall out of the pipe and land on my chair and explode underneath me. Kind of wish the camera was facing more towards where that happened, because that was freaking hilarious. Did not burn through my pants though, so that's good. So this is obviously not the sensors for the car. I wouldn't be doing this with those. These are some junk sensors that I have laying around that stops the threads from melting on me. So with this all set up like this, I'm going to throw the EGR sensor in here and put this into the car and make sure that everything clears everything. That way if I need to move anything, I can do it before I actually have it fully welded up. So let's see how that looks. So it's not very pretty with all the sensors in there. It's not like a smooth pipe, but it is what we need. He has a wideband gauge, so this sensor will be for the wideband gauge. This will be the OEM sensor for the ECU. This is obviously the EGT sensor. The sensors will plug in. EGT for some reason is like 15 feet long, so that'll fit. I know that the oxygen sensor will bolt in, so that's not a big deal. The wideband, I can route it up through the cowl, so I know that that's gonna fit. So again, not pretty, but they all need to be there, and so they are. The factory replacement downpipes obviously look better because you don't have any of this, because it's all integrated into the turbocharger, so you don't need any of it. But it is what it is. So that's that just needs to be finish welded, which will be a project for tomorrow. I've been here for many hours, so let's go over what we got accomplished today. Alright, so the big one, engine's back in. Nothing's really hooked up except for the heater core lines and the fuel line, just so it wasn't flopping around. So engine's back in, it's mounted up. So we got that done. We have our modified InGen short rim intake in with our custom reducer. I gotta, polish and clean up all of that stuff. It's finished work. Not worried about it now. Got our coolant lines figured out, just need to get reducers. We have our oil line figured out, just need to get a banjo fitting. Oil drain line is on, just got to heat shield that. We got our downpipe is fitted with the sensors in it, just needs to finish welding that. So it's a lot of little tedious finish work that needs to be done. We have our intercooler pipe here, which I will finish once I put the intercooler back in the car. So really just a bunch of little finish work things to do before we move on to the real challenging stuff, which is figuring out how to use this, and then really putting everything back together, put the axles in, fill the CVT up, fire it up, make sure everything works. The blow-off valve, you guys are probably wondering where that's going to go. I'm actually going to put it behind the grill, so it's kind of like a little thing behind the grill. You don't need to see the blow-off valve. As long as it's on that side of the piping, we'll be fine. So nice little stealth thing to clean up the engine bay. We've gotten rid of a lot of electronics in here, kind of a clutter that goes on here with the factory electronics for the version 2s, so that's really nice. But we're making some killer progress, like amazing progress. Hopefully I'll have this thing running in the next week or so. But yeah, pretty cool. Hi, you made it through a whole video. I appreciate that. You should go check out our other videos. You should also go check out our website, thefastreligion.com. We got like sweatshirts and t-shirts and stuff.